Have you ever just finagled your classroom seating chart over and over and over again, trying to find the perfect fit? If you've been teaching for any length of time, chances are you've had that one class period where you just can't put them anywhere because everywhere you put them, if you've been there, you know. Maybe you're brand new to teaching, or maybe you've realized that you need to look at your seating charts one more time and see if you can figure out a better arrangement. What I wanted to do with you today is talk about classroom seating arrangements and how that can make a big difference for your classroom management. Hey, my name is Ashley, aka Señorita Spanish, where I provide easy-to-use resources to save you time and energy while you're lesson planning. If you're new here, I just want to remind you for transparency's sake that I am not in the classroom right now, so what I'm sharing is what has worked for me just like throughout my teaching career, like what I have learned, what I have tried. I have been a traveling teacher, so multiple classrooms, and I'll talk about that with seating charts as well. But right now I'm home. I have 3 little ones. My youngest is 6 months old-ish. So just so you know where I'm coming from as I'm talking about this is me sharing my experience and different things that I've tried throughout the years. Okay, let's get into it. So first, let's talk about formation. I personally prefer to have students seated in groups, and I number the desks, or I number the people who sit in those desks, 1, 2, 3, 4, and sometimes 5 depending. I have been in situations where I'm sharing a room and it just does not work to put them in groups. If that's the case, I usually have them in rows and we scooch the rows together during the class period and then separate them before we leave, if that's what the other teacher prefers, right? So there's a little bit of give and take when you're sharing a classroom because, right, sometimes you can have your students rearrange the desks between passing periods. Sometimes that's just not an effective use of your time. Sometimes one class period needs something different than another class period. So there are times where I think, you kind of have to finagle things, or maybe have one group do something different than another group, and know that that's okay, right? Sometimes when you're making seating charts, you feel like this is the decision and it has to work for everybody, but we know that teaching isn't one size fits all, right? And class periods can be very different. They can be very different energy levels depending on when you have them during the day. So maybe groups for your first period is perfect because they're kind of warming up and they're talking to each other, but maybe that class period after lunch needs nothing like that, right? They don't need groups because you can't get them to stop talking. So why would you put them in a, you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. So just know that it's okay to do one thing for one class period and another for another, and ask them to help you move them every day. So anyways, my preferred arrangement when, the stars align and that sort of thing is to have them seated in groups, and I number the desks 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 depending on, class numbers and class size, that sort of thing. I do not always put the actual numbers on the desks, especially in the last few years of my teaching career where I was in multiple classrooms with multiple teachers in multiple schools. I just said, hey, you're person 1, you're person 2, you're person 3, and then we just reinforce that, and that becomes part of our routines, which I wanted to talk to you about. So when we sit in groups, that works really well. It lends themselves to a lot of partner work, because I do a lot of partner work. I've shared about that before, like speed date translate, volleyball reading, partner mata moscas, just to name a few. So when they're in groups of 4, it's really easy for me to say, turn to your shoulder partner, or you're working with your face partner. And those are terms I learned from a Kagan workshop that I attended. Parejas de hombro, parejas de cara is what I call them in Spanish class. And I model it like that when I say it to them so that they know, right, this person or this person, that's who I'm talking about. Obviously, there's a few times where you have a group of 3, and I just make sure the groups know, like if I say shoulder partner, that's going to be this group of 3. And if I say face partner, that's going to be that group of 3. So there's not one group of 3 every time. I also really like to have numbered people or numbered spots, because when you're working in groups, that way you can say, okay, person 4, you're going to grab all the papers that are in your group and you're going to turn them in. Person 2, you're going to come over here and you're going to pick up the thing for the next activity. That way it's not me, like, I don't know why, but when I'm passing out papers and I'm like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it always seems like it takes me so much time to like pass out papers. It is so much more efficient for me to just say, okay, persona tres, come on over, grab enough for your group. And even sometimes, like if we're doing mini whiteboards, we might have 4 people all getting something different. So, actually it's usually 3 people. So persona una is getting their whiteboards, persona dos is getting markers for everybody, and persona tres is getting the erasers for everybody, and persona cuatro, relájense, ¿vale? Okay, persona cuatro, you can just relax. And I say you because I'm talking to multiple person 4s, right? Each group has their own person, 1, 2, 3, 4. And like I said, then when they're putting things away, it's a lot faster because person one's going to do this, person two is going to do that, person three is going to do this. And it looks a little chaotic because they're all up and moving, but it's actually very much controlled chaos. Everybody has a job. Everybody's doing the thing. It's not me walking around and picking everything up and putting everything away. It makes it all go much more smoothly. I also use those numbers when I'm calling on students or for different strategies. Like I mentioned in the Kagan workshop I attended, that was actually super helpful, and they have a ton of really good strategies. So if you ever had a chance to attend one, there's a lot of things that I think we can apply to language learning from those workshops. One of those being numbered heads together, where you call it a number and they're going to pair up with other people of that same number. And there's all sorts of like rotation and pair up activities that you can do based on where they sit. I just use that to help me remember who I've called on and different kinds of questions that I might ask different students based on what number they are, which sounds a lot more complicated than it is. It's really not that complicated. One other thing that I wanted to mention, I know I've seen some classes, especially elementary seems to do this a lot, where they have like a caddy or a desk drawer system right next to the group of desks. So if they need a particular material that they might not use every day, like markers or crayons or scissors or whatever, you can just set them at that caddy space. I've never been in a classroom that had enough space for every single desk group to have like a drawer system, but if you have the space for it and you want to try that out, I think that that would be a great system. Okay, let's talk about how you pick which kids go in which seat, because right now that you have the formation and kind of the idea, you need to put kids in chairs. Okay, when you're putting kids into chairs, number one thing I always start with is head to my IEPs and 504s. Any sort of documentation that says kid needs to sit here, you need to do that first, right? Because then you're not finding them at the end and going, oh shoot, so-and-so have to switch, then you have to rejuggle everything. Take care of those things first. Same thing, if any student has come and talked to you one-on-one, or if you've had conversations with kids and they've mentioned, I work better in this setting, and they've shown you that, yeah, they work better in that setting, I take care of those next. So documentation first, then conversations that I've had with students one-on-one, and then we're going to start to look at other things here. And this next piece is also a strategy I learned from that Kagan workshop. I'm going to try and spell it out the best I can for you, but again, if you have a chance to go to that training, this system from them is probably the biggest thing that I took away from them. So I start by sorting my class into 4 groups: high, mid-low, and low. And it doesn't necessarily mean like this is an A and this is an F, but also I'm thinking about language skills, right? There are some things that some kids are just better at than the others. They have, developed these skills at different rates, at different patterns. So, a student might be a high student but have like a C, but they're really, really good at listening. So I might put them there instead. That kind of thing I take into account. Okay, now I'm going to take those 4 groups of students and kind of place them on the seating chart and make sure that the kids from each group are the same number, but they're not always the same number every time. So what I mean by that is my like mid-high students might be 3s, but my high students won't be 1s every single time. Like they might be 1s one time and they might be 4s another time, and they might be, you know what I mean? So the idea is that this system is a little bit sneaky, right? They're gonna catch on maybe, or some of them have caught on in the past, but when you shuffle things up like that, and you're not always doing the same kids in the same groups every single time, right? Because their abilities are going to change throughout the year. As you're doing that kind of grouping and regrouping and changing your numbers, and makes it less likely for the students to be like, all of the smart kids are 1s, because that's not what we're doing, but they might think that, right? So helping them avoid that conversation. As you're placing your students, you might want to consider some other things, right? Some students might really work well with another student, and some students, if you pair them together, they're going to drive everybody crazy, or they're just going to drive you crazy because they're best friends, so that sort of thing. Obviously, you start to take that into account. So IEPs, conversations, grouping, and then placing the kids where things are going to run the most smoothly as much as possible. One more thing that I want to mention as we're thinking about those groups of levels that I talked about, I try to make it so that the students who are super high or just high and the students who are low won't be paired. So if you're thinking about they're sitting in a group of 4 and they're going to work with a face partner and they're going to work with a shoulder partner, that means the student who is in the high category and the student who is in the low category, they're going to be diagonal from each other. So they will work together when they're in a small group setting and they're working in their group of 4 or their group of 5, but it won't be that pair diagonally, because sometimes what I found happen is that the high student does all the work. They don't pair well necessarily because they just it's like they're impatient. They don't let the other student participate, So that's frustrating for both of them, because nobody wants to be with a partner where you're not working well together. So I have found that it's best when they're closer in level. And then same thing the other way works when you put your mid-high and your low and your mid-low and your low next to each other. That seems to work a little bit better. And of course, you may try that and you might say, that's nonsense. You know, I don't have any issues with that at all. I have just seen that it seems to cause some frustration between students if they're paired with somebody who is of a totally different ability level, right? Test it out, see what works for you. I'm just sharing what I have found in the past. Let's talk about that a little bit. If you don't have the space for groups, or you don't have, right, you're coming into somebody else's classroom and they're in rows, I still think of them in groups of 4, and I just kind of imagine it on the grid when I'm placing them in their seats. So when we're looking at our rows of students, the front row over here might be a high student, then we might have a mid-high student, then a low student, then a mid-low student. So there's still a group of 4 here. And what's going to happen in the class period is, even though their rows are apart, they're going to sit and turn to this person, and that's going to be their shoulder partner. And then, okay, now we're doing a different partner activity. You're going to turn around and work with the person behind you, which is not ideal because usually there's something on the screen, right? So they're going to have to turn their bodies to look at the screen, to look at their partner, to look at the screen. That kind of thing does happen. So that's why I would usually prefer groups where everybody is kind of on an angle to the screen, but it's about making it work, right? We got to make it work. Again, just sharing what has worked for me in the past and what I have found to work the best for my teaching style, for my energy level, for the different kinds of activities that I like to do, all of that sort of stuff. I'd love to hear more about what classroom seating arrangement has worked for you, or the different things that you've tried and kind of how you felt about it. Feel free to drop me a comment down below. I would love to hear your experiences and to learn from you, especially if you've been in a classroom where you're able to be deskless, or you have flexible seating, or maybe you've tried groups and you're like, they're the worst. I hate groups. Ashley, why would you say groups are the best? I want to hear it all. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you're looking for more ideas and resources, things to help you as you prep for back to school, or maybe with your classroom management strategy, check out this video here on classroom policies and procedures to help you prep for back to school. I think you'll love it. All right, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.